I'm not really good at writing scripts for these videos, nor am I any good with doing videos regarding drama of any sort. I am mostly here today because I wanted to take accountability for my actions and attempt to move to a new chapter of my life that does not involve the baggage of drama that I have kept for nearly 12 years now. I believe it is morally correct to let go of drama, negativity, hatred, and all of these negative emotions that have tied me to be involved with this for as long as I have. Before continuing, I want to explain something about how this video is presented. You may notice that I'm using text-to-speech instead of my real voice. This is a deliberate decision. In the past, my face and voice have been taken and used in ways that I did not consent to, including being edited or presented in ways that misrepresented me. Because of that, I'm not comfortable sharing my voice in this video. The only recordings of my voice that have been online were from when I was a minor, and I don't want to continue putting that kind of personal information into a space where it can be taken out of context or reused without my control. Using text-to-speech allows me to still communicate everything I need to say, while maintaining a level of privacy and safety that I feel is necessary given the situation. This choice isn't about avoiding accountability. It's about setting boundaries for myself while still being able to speak openly. To start off this video, I want to talk about something that isn't easy to admit. When I was younger, I hurt people. I harassed others. I lied. I deceived people who trusted me. And when I caused harm, I didn't face it. I turned away. I ignored the people I hurt. Instead of taking responsibility. That's not something I'm proud of. And for a long time, it was easier not to think about it at all. But avoiding it doesn't undo it. What I did wasn't vague. It wasn't just mistakes. It was specific. It showed up in the words I used. And the way I treated people. I said things that were cruel. I used language that was offensive. And harmful. At the time, I told myself it was just jokes. But words don't just disappear. They stay with people. I also contributed to harassment. I made people feel targeted, excluded, attacked. And when they reacted, when they were hurt or angry, I didn't try to understand why. I made it about me. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to be seen that way. So instead of handling it with any kind of maturity, I became insensitive. I took the most personal, most vulnerable parts of people, and I used them against them. I chose what I knew would hurt the most. And I did it anyway. There's another part of this I need to be honest about. I took creative work that wasn't mine, character designs, and I acted like they were my own. And when I was questioned, I didn't come clean. I lied. Not once, but repeatedly. Because I cared more about protecting myself than being honest. And that pattern didn't stop there. When people confronted me, I didn't listen. I didn't reflect. I argued. I picked apart everything they said. I looked for flaws, anything. So I wouldn't have to face the bigger point. I shifted blame onto them. Their tone. Their reactions. Anything to avoid responsibility. I convinced myself that if I could win the argument, then I wasn't in the wrong. But what I was really doing was silencing people. Over and over again. Dismissing them. Talking over them. Reducing what they were saying, just so I wouldn't have to hear it. Not because they didn't have a point. But because I didn't want to accept that they did. At the time, I wanted to believe everyone else was the problem. But that wasn't the truth. The truth is, I made disgusting choices as a child. And those choices hurt people. There's another part of this that I need to be honest about, even though it's complicated. Multiple times, I admitted to things that I did not do. At the time, I thought it was the right thing to do. I was overwhelmed. There was constant pressure, harassment, threats of doxing, and people telling me that if I just admitted everything, it would stop. So I did. I said things that weren't true, because I thought it would make everything go away. But it didn't. Instead, I ended up taking responsibility for things I never did, including very serious accusations. And I need to be clear about that now. Admitting to something doesn't make it true, especially when it comes from fear, pressure, and not knowing how to handle the situation. I also want to address something related to that. There are claims that I've been behind anonymous harassment. People have told me to admit to it, saying they know for a fact that it was me. But that isn't true. That harassment is not something I did. And I'm not going to take responsibility for actions that aren't mine. At the same time, I understand why people question me. Because I've already shown that I was capable of harmful behavior in the past. But that doesn't mean every accusation is automatically true. And part of being honest now is drawing that line clearly. I am not saying that what I did was acceptable, and I am not using the fact that I was harassed as a way to excuse my behavior. My actions were harmful, they affected multiple people over the years, and they deserve to be called out. I take responsibility for that. However, I also need to address something important. Over time, particularly in statements I made in Google Documents, I admitted to behavior that I did not actually do. This includes claims such as running certain KVA accounts, anonymously harassing others, creating explicit content targeting people, and making accounts dedicated to tracing and altering others' artwork and turning it into explicit material. Just to name a few of the false accusations I admitted to. Those admissions were not accurate. Looking back, it was wrong and immature of me to claim responsibility for things I hadn't done. I believed at the time that admitting to everything, even things that weren't true, would reduce the situation or make the harassment stop. Instead, it created a false narrative around me and distorted the timeline and context of what actually happened. I want to correct that now. I take responsibility for the actions that were genuinely mine, but I will not continue to stand by claims that are not true. I apologize for lying about actions I had committed in hopes it would get everything to stop, as that is a very immature way of thinking. I, instead, should have just been brutally honest and come clean about actions I had committed, instead of lying about stuff I had done, to try and protect myself and take the easy way out of a situation. I've already taken accountability for the real harm I caused in my past. But I'm not going to expand that into things that didn't happen. Being honest means both owning what I did, and being clear about what I didn't. So moving forward, accountability can't just be something I say. It has to show up in what I do. That means being honest about patterns and honest about my past actions. There was a time when I used alternate accounts to harass people. I created distance between myself and what I was doing, so I wouldn't have to face it. I want to be clear. That is behavior I have left behind. I do not run alternate accounts to target or harass anyone. And I haven't for a long time. I stopped this behavior when I became an adult, as I saw how immature and damaging this behavior was. Another part of accountability is knowing when to step back. So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking time offline, on purpose. Not to avoid this, but to actually reflect on it. To make sure the changes I'm trying to make are real. I'll be offline for the next couple of months, using that time to understand my past behavior more clearly, and to keep working on who I am now. Because change isn't something you say once. It's something you choose again and again. However, before I step away and end this video, there's a handful of things I need to address. I've seen accusations about me circulating online. Some of them are serious. And I understand why people would take them seriously, especially considering everything I've just said as well as the patterns of my past actions. But there are also claims being made that are not true. And I can't ignore that, because those accusations are harmful, not just to me, but to the truth of what actually happened. I want to make it clear that this isn't me trying to undo anything I've said. I stand by my accountability. But there is a difference between owning real harm and accepting things that aren't true. And I refuse to blur this line any further than I already have previously. I'm not going to go back and forth. I'm not going to argue. What I will do is share my side, once. I'll provide what I can, including any context or evidence, so there's a clear record of what actually happened. Not to attack anyone, and not to restart conflict, but to make sure the full picture exists. After that, I'm stepping back. I have been stepped back for a while. I understand not everyone will believe me. And I know my past behavior makes that harder. But this is part of being honest. Even when it's uncomfortable. If you're someone I hurt, I don't expect forgiveness. This isn't about sympathy. It's about ownership. All I can do going forward is be consistent. Be honest. And make sure my actions match the person I'm trying to be now, not the person I was before. I'm still learning. Still working on myself. And this, being honest about who I was, is part of that. I want to be clear about how I feel looking back on all of this. I am genuinely remorseful for the harm I caused, the harassment, the hate, the words I used, the slander, and the times I stole from others or passed off their creativity as my own. I regret the choices I made, including using alternate accounts to get around being blocked and to continue behavior that I should have stopped. That's something I'm not proud of, and it's something I take responsibility for. At the same time, while I do stand by the fact that I experienced harassment myself, I don't want to keep holding on to claims or arguments from when I was a child. Not to dismiss them entirely, but because I don't want to continue a cycle that has gone on for years. I want to move forward, not stay stuck in a back and forth. What matters now is that I recognize the harm I caused, I take ownership of it, and I actively work toward being a better person than I was before. After this, I'm going to use the second part of this video to address and clarify some of the accusations being made about me. These are serious claims, and I don't believe they should be left unaddressed, especially when they have the potential to permanently damage my own, and others' reputation. My intention here isn't to attack anyone or continue conflict, but to present my side clearly, with whatever context or evidence I can provide, so there's a more accurate understanding of what actually happened. I'm doing this once, in one place, in the hope that it helps bring clarity, rather than continuing a cycle of speculation and harm. Before I go through this, I want to set a clear tone. This isn't about attacking anyone. And it's not about trying to win an argument. It's about clarity. I'm going to go through a few of the accusations that are currently being shared, and respond to them directly, with the context and evidence I have. I'm going to keep this focused and factual. For each point, I'll explain what's being claimed, and then show what I can that either supports or contradicts it. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at what's actually there. The critique I have gotten in the past has been valid. There has been things I've done wrong, however I've already taken accountability for them. And I'm not here to erase that. But I'm also not going to accept claims that aren't supported by what actually happened. Another important point, some of what's being shared is taken out of context, or presented in a way that changes how it looks. So where needed, I'm including full context, not just fragments, so it can be understood properly. After this section, I'm not going to keep revisiting these points. I'm putting this here so there's a clear, documented response, in one place. Beyond that, I'm continuing to stay away from the consistent back and forth I find myself dragged into online. You don't have to agree with me. But everything I'm showing here is what I have available, presented as clearly and honestly as I can. This is the claim as it's being presented. Now, here's the context. There's one situation I want to clarify from when I was a minor. At the time, there was a friend of mine who people believed was me. Because of that, they directed harassment toward that account, assuming it was mine. In response, that friend said some very inappropriate and harmful things. I want to be clear that I do not support or stand by what was said. I also want to clarify my role in that situation. I was not the person running that account or sending those messages. I was a separate person involved on the side, and I have evidence that shows that. Specifically, I have a recording from that time where I was documenting what was happening while my friend was screen sharing the harassment they were receiving. That recording shows I was observing the situation, not controlling the account. I understand how this situation has been misinterpreted, but it's important for me to state clearly that those actions were not mine. And here's the evidence I have. The evidence I've provided shows that I was not the person operating that account or sending those messages. In the recording, I'm documenting the situation while my friend is screen sharing what was happening to them, which places me as a separate, observing party rather than the one in control. It demonstrates that the account people believed was mine was actually being used by someone else, and that I was witnessing the harassment rather than carrying it out. This context is important, because it clarifies the difference between being associated with a situation and being directly responsible for the actions within it. It's also important to add context around the accusation itself. The individual who has accused me of sending those threats was, at the time, participating in group conversations that were directed at me. In those spaces, there were instances of harassment toward me, including transphobic remarks, mockery of my identity, my artwork, and references to very personal experiences. I'm not bringing this up to deflect from my own past actions, but to provide a fuller picture of the situation and the environment in which these claims developed. This context doesn't justify anything I've done in the past, but it does matter when understanding how these accusations formed and why they should be looked at carefully alongside the actual evidence. To add to this, the evidence I'm providing was originally posted in May of 2021. At that time, I would have been 16 years old, as my birthday is in August. That means both the harassment directed toward me and the alleged threat being referenced would have taken place while I was still a minor. This is important context, because some claims online have suggested that this is something recent, which isn't accurate. The original upload date of the evidence shows that this situation is from several years ago, not something that has happened recently. I'm not saying this to excuse anything, but to make sure the timeline is understood correctly, based on verifiable dates rather than how it's currently being presented. I also want to address the way this accusation has been shared. Seeing my face doxed and edited alongside individuals like Epstein and Yanderidov was deeply uncomfortable and distressing. Especially given the context, that this was circulating directly after a false accusation tied to this situation. The way the evidence was presented was also misleading. Parts of it were cropped in a way that removed important context, and the timeline was misrepresented. As I've shown, this situation took place in 2021, when I was 16, not in 2026 as has been claimed. Again, I'm not bringing this up to escalate anything, but to show how the situation has been framed in a way that doesn't reflect the actual evidence or timeline. There's also something I need to be honest about in terms of how I can respond to certain claims. I don't really know how to prove a negative, how to prove that I don't own or run accounts that people are attributing to me. I haven't used or owned a Twitter account for a long time, and I've chosen not to be on that platform. I don't use Blue Sky either. As for Instagram, any accounts I previously had have been inactive and abandoned since around 2023 to 2024. So when accounts on those platforms are linked to me, I'm left in a position where I don't have a direct way to show they aren't mine, because there's nothing there connecting them to me in the first place. All I can do is be clear about what I do use. The only platforms I actively use and recognize as mine are YouTube, Discord, TikTok, Artfight and DeviantArt. Beyond that, I don't have control over, access to, or involvement with the accounts being mentioned. And I understand that can be frustrating to hear, but it's the honest reality of the situation. While this claim is basically a he said she said, and I apologize, I cannot understand how I am meant to provide evidence to prove a negative when I do not own accounts associated with those platforms. Additionally, the only evidence I can use to support my claim is clips from Discord. Some of the posts on the account were posted when I was actively engrossed inside of a video game, at work, or simply not even online to be able to post. These clips will be heavily edited to hide the involvement of friends or family, as I do not wish to pull them into this situation. I want to address the wider impact that has come from people incorrectly attributing multiple accounts to me. In some cases, accounts that are not mine have been targeted under the assumption that I am behind them. This has led to people contacting those account owners, spreading claims that they are responsible for things like theft of artwork or designs, and making accusations to third parties based solely on that assumption. This has caused real distress for people who are not me and have no connection to me or my actions. It has also resulted in misinformation being shared about those account owners, damaging their credibility and reputation without evidence. I want to be clear that I am not responsible for those accounts, and I am not involved in their actions. When accusations are based on misidentification, it creates a situation where innocent people can be pulled into harassment simply because they are wrongly believed to be me. This is part of why I've been trying to clarify what accounts are actually mine, and what are not, because the consequences of those assumptions extend beyond just online discussion. They affect real people who are being wrongly associated with things they did not do. These people have spread to the clients of others that the account owner is a pedophile. This is direct deformation and heavily damages the owner of that account. I have tried to avoid repeatedly engaging with this situation, in the hope that it would de-escalate on its own. However, after continued misattribution of accounts to me, the consequences have unfortunately escalated beyond online discussion. In one case, an account owner who is not me was wrongfully associated with me and subsequently subjected to harassment and serious accusations as a result of that assumption. This included people contacting them directly and spreading claims about them based on the belief that they were me, despite no verified evidence supporting that. As a result, that individual's credibility and reputation were significantly damaged through repeated targeting by multiple people acting on the same incorrect assumption. This is something I do not condone, and I do not support the way that innocent people are being pulled into conflict due to mistaken identity. It is important to separate legitimate criticism of my own actions from situations where unrelated individuals are being harmed because they are incorrectly believed to be me. When that line is not respected, it leads to further harm rather than accountability. This is part of why I am attempting to clearly define what accounts are and are not associated with me, in order to reduce the ongoing collateral damage caused by these assumptions. I want to bring to your attention and address the seriousness of some of the claims that have been circulating. Accusations involving things like abuse or sexual misconduct are extremely serious, and they should not be shared lightly or used in online discussions without clear, verified evidence. When claims of this nature are spread without proper substantiation, they can cause significant and lasting harm to the people being accused, including damage to reputation and real-world consequences. If someone genuinely believes that such serious wrongdoing has taken place, the appropriate course of action is to report it to the relevant authorities rather than using it as a basis for public accusation or coordinated harassment online. Using allegations of this severity in online spaces without evidence does not contribute to accountability, it creates confusion, encourages harassment, and increases harm to everyone involved. I also want to address another accusation that has been made about me, claims that I am racist. I'm going to go through each point individually and respond as clearly as I can. First, my heavily racist character design and character choices. Just to show you what the characters look like, I am going to put both of them up on the screen right now. Please be aware that one of them, the Siren Queen, was stolen from somebody else and is going to get a redesign in the near future. The person I stole her from was Orange Queen, now known as Blood Orange 3. I do not condone theft of others' characters, and the theft of this design was clearly petty on my end. I am just here to provide contextual evidence towards the above claim. I am not here to claim the design as mine. When I was a minor, I created a character who, in her normal form, was white, and in her siren form was described and drawn as dark orange. At the time, I did not understand that the way I portrayed that form could be interpreted as resembling a darker skin tone, or that it could come across as implying that a character becoming evil was visually tied to looking like a person of color. That was not my intention, but I understand now why it can be seen that way, and why it is harmful. At the time, the response I received was mostly being shouted at and labeled as racist, without the context being clearly explained to me. Because of that, I didn't actually understand the specific issue with the design until much later, when it was properly pointed out and explained. By that point, I had already stopped using that character entirely and moved on to a different design, so I didn't go back and revise or correct it. Looking back, I recognize that I should have been more aware of how my design choices could be interpreted, and I take responsibility for that lack of awareness. This is something I've since reflected on, and it has changed how I approach character design and visual representation going forward. Designs that I now see as racist have been taken down. I have been working on redesigning and rewriting the designs so they do not come off as racist. And, while doing this, have learnt so much about many different cultures. Now and going forward I will always look into the culture I wish to represent in my creative writing and character designs and reference off of real-life people to try and get as accurate as possible to the representation. I do not wish to offend anyone with my creative writing. So, I believe this is the best course of action going forward. That being said, I know I will sometimes slip up and make mistakes, as I struggle heavily in understanding context. Understanding from seeing others' point of view, and I heavily struggle with understanding how to fix something like the above situations. I please ask that, if people have issue with my writing or how I have worded something, to come forward and express these issues to me. I am more than happy to learn from my mistakes, and I will always try my hardest to rectify the issues I had caused with any and all harmful media I have produced. Nobody is perfect. I please ask that you respect this and treat any future issues, if there is any surrounding this topic, with respect and maturity when bringing it to my attention. Second accusation is towards my chosen name, Kenji. The claim is that by using this name, I am Asian fishing. I want to clarify that choosing a name is a personal decision, and in my case, it was not done to present myself as Japanese or to mislead people about my ethnicity. I have never recently claimed to be Japanese, and I have not used this name to impersonate or represent myself as part of that culture. There's no evidence of me presenting myself as Asian. Only that I use a name that originates from that language. I understand that names can carry cultural meaning, and I'm open to listening if people feel uncomfortable, but the accusation that I am deliberately trying to deceive people about my identity isn't supported by my actions. I want to be direct about the claim that using the name, Kenji, makes me racist. Yes, the name has Japanese origins. And no, I have never claimed to be Japanese. I'm a white British man, and I've been clear about that. When I was around 12, I made jokes about being Japanese. That was immature, and I don't stand by it. I'm 22 now, and I don't make those claims because they're simply not true. The reason I chose the name, Kenji, is straightforward: I liked the name. That's it. It wasn't chosen to misrepresent myself, and it wasn't chosen to mock or appropriate a culture. Names are used across cultures all the time. Names like Kai, Luca, or Sophia exist in multiple cultural contexts and are widely used by people who aren't from those backgrounds. In online spaces especially, people choose names for personal reasons, identity, comfort, or simply preference. That doesn't automatically make it harmful. Kenji is not my legal name. It's a chosen name I used online, and it became a nickname people used for me in real life, adapted from my actual name. I understand that cultural sensitivity matters, and I'm willing to listen where something genuinely crosses a line. But using a name because you like it, without pretending to be part of that culture, is not, on its own, racism. Framing it that way removes important context and oversimplifies the situation. I also need to directly address the contradiction in how this accusation is being applied. Some of the same people calling me racist for using the name, Kenji, are using Japanese names, phrases, or stylizations themselves in their own usernames and online identities. In at least one case, that includes using a Japanese-style pronunciation of a phrase as a username. Yet those choices are not being labeled as racist within their own circles. The difference is that when it comes to me, it is. That inconsistency matters. If something is genuinely harmful, it should be called out consistently, not selectively depending on who it's coming from. When the same behavior is accepted in one case but condemned in another, it raises questions about whether the concern is actually about cultural sensitivity, or about reinforcing a specific narrative around me. I'm not pointing this out to avoid accountability. I'm pointing it out because standards should be applied fairly. And in this situation, they clearly are not. Third accusation was my interest in Wendigos. The claim is that my hyperfixation on Wendigos is inherently racist or disrespectful to indigenous cultures. I understand that the concept of the Wendigo comes from indigenous folklore, and that it can be a sensitive topic. My interest has been based on how the concept is often portrayed in broader media and horror contexts, not an attempt to mock or disrespect its cultural origins. There's no evidence of me using it in a way that targets or insults indigenous people. That said, I recognize this is an area where sensitivity matters, and I'm willing to be more mindful about how I engage with it going forward. I also want to address my understanding of Wendigos more directly, because this is an area where I was originally wrong. My only exposure to them growing up came from horror media, where they're often portrayed as deer-like creatures. That's how I understood them at the time, and that misunderstanding came from the media I consumed and hyperfixated on, not from any intention to be disrespectful. Since then, I've taken the time to look into their actual cultural origins, and I understand that this portrayal is inaccurate and can be seen as culturally insensitive. I regret that, and I'm genuinely sorry for contributing to that misunderstanding. Because of this, I've stepped away from using that imagery and even changed things like usernames to reflect that growth. I'm not bringing up my past understanding as an excuse or a way to avoid responsibility, it's simply the context of how I got it wrong. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that when this was brought up, it wasn't always done in a constructive way. Instead of being calmly informed, there were instances where people responded with harassment and insults, including assumptions about accounts that weren't mine and personal attacks toward me. Fourth accusation, being told I was racist for asking someone not to use slurs toward me. In this situation, I told someone from Australia not to use slurs directed at me. This has been reframed as me being racist toward Aboriginal people. I want to be clear, asking someone not to use slurs is not an act of racism. There is no evidence that I targeted Aboriginal people or made statements against them. The situation was about setting a boundary for how I was being spoken to, not about attacking any group. Reframing that as racism changes the context of what actually happened. Across all of these points, I want to be consistent in how I respond. If I have done something that is genuinely harmful, I will take responsibility for it. But accusations as serious as racism need to be based on clear, accurate evidence, not assumptions or reinterpretations of unrelated actions. I'm open to learning and improving where needed, but I also have to be honest about what these situations actually show, and what they don't. I wish to address a specific example that has been used to label me as racist, which is a clear misrepresentation of what actually happened. An account, wrongfully assumed to be mine, asked someone not to use the word retard because it is a slur and is personally harmful to me as an autistic person. That was a direct boundary about language being used toward me, not an attack on any group or community. Despite this, it has been reframed as an act of racism, which is not supported by the context or intent of what was said. That post was then pinned publicly on Tumblr for months before the accounts involved were removed, and the screenshot continues to be circulated through other accounts associated with the same individuals who have been involved in harassment toward me. This is important because it shows how a basic request not to use ableist language against me was taken out of context and rebranded into a separate accusation entirely. That kind of reframing is not accurate, and it contributes to a narrative that doesn't reflect what actually happened or why it was said. The fifth accusation is also something I want to address, which is the accusations around my artwork and tracing. The honest truth is that, when I was younger, I did trace heavily. This included other people's artwork, and at times even work from people who were actively hostile toward me. I also lied about it in the past and continued those habits across multiple accounts. I understand why that damaged trust, and I take responsibility for that. A big part of why this developed was because I struggled with my own confidence in art. I didn't like what I was producing, and I was also being bullied for it. At 12 years old, instead of being guided or supported in how to improve, I was often met with hostility and accounts created specifically to call me out or mock my work. That experience didn't teach me how to grow, it pushed me toward shortcuts and avoidance. I also want to be clear about the way this situation was handled over the years. While I accept responsibility for my actions, a lot of the response to me was not constructive. My artwork was often mocked, and accounts were created specifically to point out tracing while also ridiculing my ability rather than helping me improve. The "Kenji is tracing" narrative often became less about genuine critique and more about targeting me personally. I am not using any of this as an excuse for my behavior. I am responsible for the tracing I did and the dishonesty that came with it. However, I do think it's important context in understanding how my learning process became so unhealthy in the first place. Out of everything I've been accused of, this is the area where the criticism is most fair. I did trace, I did lie about it, and I did misrepresent my process. I understand why that affects trust, and I am actively working to move away from those habits completely and rebuild my skills properly going forward. The sixth accusation was made by Dirt Pile of Worms themselves. They claim that I have attempted to silence people by contacting them, sharing personal information, or encouraging others to intimidate them on my behalf. I want to state this clearly and directly: I have never engaged in, instructed, or consented to any form of doxing, blackmail, or attempts to silence anyone. I do not condone that behavior in any form. I have had these individuals blocked across all known platforms for a long time due to the level of distress and harassment I have experienced, to the point where I have needed support for anxiety as a result. The only direct contact I ever had was years ago, around the early stages of this situation, and since then I have made no attempt to engage, because any interaction has repeatedly been reframed and escalated in ways that I do not agree with or recognize. Screenshots have been circulated from an account I do not own, including one under the name Skibbity, which is being used as supposed evidence. I want to be clear that I do not own or control that account, and I have no connection to it. I also do not use or identify with that name in any way, and I do not understand why it would be attributed to me. I dislike brain rot as is and do not like Skibbity Toilet as I find it childish and don't understand the meme. If you know me, you know I don't like Skibbity Toilet or 6'7", so I am genuinely confused on how Skibbity is linked to me other than the classic "it's totally Kenji" mindset. In those messages, there are serious claims being made alongside the assumption that I was involved in or responsible for the account in question. I want to be clear that I was not aware of those direct messages at the time, and I was not the person sending them, instructing them, or involved in any way. The account being referenced is not mine, and I did not have any control over it or knowledge of its actions until these screenshots were later brought forward as part of the accusation against me. I do not condone or support the kind of behavior shown in those messages, including attempts to intimidate or pressure others. At no point did I ask for, approve of, or participate in anything of that nature. My position is simply that I am not connected to the account being discussed, and I am not responsible for the content of its messages. I understand that because of my past behavior, people are going to question things I say. I accept that. But I also need to separate what I have actually done from what is being incorrectly attributed to me. Across multiple claims, I have been linked to accounts, messages, and actions that I did not create, control, or participate in. In some cases, screenshots are being used as evidence without full context, or based on assumptions about account ownership rather than verified identity. To be clear, I am not involved in the operation of those accounts, I did not send those messages, and I did not direct or approve any form of harassment, intimidation, or attempts to silence others. I also want to be direct about the seriousness of some of the claims being made. Allegations involving abuse, sexual misconduct, or criminal behavior are extremely serious, and they should not be treated as casual discussion or used in online callouts without proper evidence or formal reporting channels. When they are circulated in that way, they create harm not only to the accused, but also to others who become unintentionally pulled into the situation through misidentification. In my case, I am only responsible for my own actions, which I have already addressed earlier in this video. I will not take responsibility for actions carried out by accounts that are not mine, and I will not accept claims that are not supported by verifiable evidence. Where confusion has come from misattributed accounts or screenshots, I am stating clearly that I have no connection to those accounts and no involvement in the actions being described. At the same time, I am not here to argue or continue back-and-forth discussions online. I am addressing this once so that my position is clear, and then I am stepping away from the situation. I understand that not everyone will agree with me or believe me, and I accept that. My focus going forward is on accountability for what I have actually done, and removing myself from ongoing cycles of online conflict. 7th accusation: that I have been informed multiple times that I have allegedly sent anonymous messages on platforms such as Curious Cat, Tumblr, and Telenym. I want to be clear about my actual use of these platforms. I do not use Curious Cat or Telenym. I have not used Telenym in a couple of years, and I have never had an account on Curious Cat at any point. Part of the reason for this is that I have found those environments to be harmful to my mental well-being, and I have chosen to stay away from them. My husband has also encouraged me to avoid platforms like those due to the impact they have had on my mental and emotional health. As for Tumblr, when I do use the platform, my messages are not sent anonymously. They are sent with my username attached, and I have consistently made it clear that if a message appears signed as me, it should be treated as actually coming from me. I have also stated before that I do not support or encourage anyone attempting to impersonate me or sign messages on my behalf. Despite this, there have still been claims that I have been sending anonymous harassment or racist messages. I want to be clear that I have no involvement in those claims. At the same time, I also want to acknowledge the difficulty in addressing this. These accusations involve messages on platforms I do not use, do not have access to, and cannot verify. Because of that, I cannot directly examine the accounts or messages being referenced, which makes it inherently difficult to prove a negative in a concrete way. All I can do is be transparent about the platforms I actually use, and state clearly that I am not responsible for anonymous messages being attributed to me on services I do not have accounts on or access to. On Tumblr specifically, the messages being referenced were directed toward an account that had previously posted images of my face and my sister's face. Because of that, I deliberately stayed away from engaging with that account for my own privacy and well-being. The only messages I can verify as my own are those that are clearly sent with my username attached. I do not send anonymous messages on any platform, and I consistently make sure my username is visible so there is no confusion about whether something came from me. There have also been claims that anonymous messages signed K were from me. I want to be clear that I did not send those. I do not use anonymous messaging systems in that way, and I do not sign off anonymous messages pretending to be someone else. My position is simple: if a message is genuinely from me, it will be attached to my username. Anything anonymous or unsigned is not something I can verify as my own, and I am not responsible for messages being attributed to me without that clear identification. You can clearly see, in the evidence I had shown before this, that I had told the Kenji document account about this very ruling because of the misinformation going around about the anonymous messages being me. 8th accusation. This accusation is serious and was made about me based on screenshots from when I was 16 years old. These screenshots have been used to frame me in a way that suggests current wrongdoing, despite the fact that they originate from several years ago, when I was still a minor. I understand why people react strongly to language and content like that, but I want to be clear that presenting old, contextual messages as if they reflect my current identity or actions is misleading. Because of the seriousness of the label being attached to these claims, I do not believe this is something that should be spread casually online or used in call-out contexts. Allegations of this nature should be handled with appropriate caution and, if anyone genuinely believes there is ongoing criminal behavior, they should be directed through proper reporting channels rather than circulated publicly in a way that encourages harassment. My concern here is not to dismiss serious topics, but to stress that context and accuracy matter, especially when accusations of this severity are being discussed. To add further context to this situation, I also want to clarify that I did not personally write the messages being referenced in that instance. They were written by a friend of mine at the time, who was 14 years old, while I was 16. The messages were sent during a highly emotional situation in response to ongoing harassment I was experiencing from the user involved, which had been causing me significant distress. That does not change the fact that the situation escalated in an inappropriate way, and I understand why the content of those messages is taken seriously. However, it is important to be accurate about who actually wrote them and the circumstances they were written under. My friend later apologized for what was said, although that apology was not accepted. Despite this, the situation is still being brought up years later and presented as if it is direct evidence of my own actions, rather than something I was not personally responsible for writing. I am not using this to deflect accountability for my past overall, but to ensure that this specific claim is represented accurately and not attributed to me in a way that is misleading. I also want to be clear that this situation has not existed in a vacuum. Over a long period of time, I have been subjected to ongoing harassment, repeated misinformation, and persistent misattribution of accounts and actions to me. Claims about me have been circulated publicly in ways that I believe are inaccurate, taken out of context, or presented without verification, which has contributed to a continuing cycle of confusion and escalation. This has not only affected me personally, but has also extended to people close to me, including my family, who have been drawn into the situation through association and indirect targeting. Regardless of intent, the result has been real-world stress and harm caused by information being spread without proper accuracy or accountability. I want to be very clear that I am not using this to attack individuals or to restart ongoing conflicts. However, I am also not going to ignore the wider impact of repeated misinformation and misidentification. When claims are circulated without evidence or are based on assumptions about identity, it creates an environment where harassment spreads and credibility is damaged on all sides, including for people who are not involved at all. My intention in addressing this is not to focus on individuals, but to make it clear that I am correcting what I can, acknowledging the broader consequences, and stepping away from the long-standing cycle of online conflict that has surrounded this situation. The last accusation is in regards as to what has been happening online involving claims about my family. There have been accusations made that I was pretending to be my sister on Tumblr, which is the claim those involved used as justification for a wave of targeted harassment. This included highly inappropriate and distressing messages being directed toward her, as well as attempts to involve and contact family members outside of the original online space. In addition to this, private family-related social media accounts were referenced and used in attempts to discredit the existence of my sister altogether, alongside messages being sent to my grandmother that were clearly intended to escalate distress and pressure through personal targeting. I want to be clear that I was not involved in any of this behavior. I did not impersonate my sister, and I do not condone the harassment or targeting of family members under any circumstances. Regardless of the disagreements or accusations being made online, involving family members crosses a clear line into unacceptable behavior. The impact of this has extended beyond online discourse and has caused real distress to people who were not part of the situation. I also need to address the situation involving harassment that has extended toward my family, because this has been one of the most serious and distressing parts of what has happened. Over time, there have been repeated claims that I was impersonating my sister on Tumblr. This assumption was then used as justification for targeted harassment toward her, despite there being no verified evidence that I was involved in or responsible for those accounts. My sister was brought into a situation that she was not part of, based on misidentification and incorrect attribution. This escalated further when family members were also targeted indirectly. Private family-related social media accounts, including those belonging to my grandmother, were accessed and referenced in attempts to discredit or challenge the existence of my sister. Messages were also sent to my grandmother in relation to these claims, which caused unnecessary distress and involved people who were not connected to the original situation in any way. My intention in addressing this is not to escalate conflict or accuse specific individuals, but to clarify what I was and was not involved in, and to make it clear that misattribution has had consequences far beyond online discussion. To add clarity to this, I do in fact have a sister, too, in fact. That is a basic part of my real-life family context, and it is not something that is up for debate based on online assumptions. Because of that, attempts were made to discredit or deny her existence by digging through and referencing personal family social media, including accounts belonging to my grandmother. From my perspective, escalating a disagreement online to the point where private family spaces are being searched through and used as evidence of whether someone's family members exist is not a reasonable or proportionate way to approach any accusation. This kind of behavior highlights how far misattribution and assumption have been taken in this situation, and why I believe it is important to draw a clear line between online claims and real-world private family life. I also want to set a clear boundary regarding my family. One of my sisters is 16, and she only wanted limited, censored pictures of her to be shown inside of this video. I fully respect that, and because of her age and her privacy, I will not be showing or posting any uncensored images of her. I can provide limited, appropriate evidence that she exists where necessary, but I will not compromise her safety or privacy to prove a point. I ask that people respect that boundary and do not attempt to search for, share, or circulate images or information about her after this video. She is not part of this situation and should not be made part of it. I also want to briefly acknowledge that there have been accounts created and used primarily to focus on me, my actions, and ongoing discussion around this situation. I'm aware of that, and I understand that it's part of how this has continued to circulate. At this point, I'm not going to engage with those spaces or respond to them individually. My focus is not on monitoring or reacting to ongoing posts about me, but on taking accountability where it is actually mine and stepping away from the cycle that has kept this going. Continuing to engage with every new post or account would only extend that cycle further, and that's something I am choosing not to do anymore. While I am on this topic, I also want to make it clear that I do not consent to images of myself being circulated in these spaces. This includes current photos, older photos, and any images of me from before my transition. I am uncomfortable with any images of my face being uploaded to accounts that are not my own, and I ask that this boundary be respected. Additionally, I do not want my dead name or current name shared or associated with these accounts in any form, including variations of either name. I especially do not want my dead name linked to me, as it is a dead name for a reason. Lastly, I do not consent to any artwork I have created, past or present, being reposted or included on these accounts without my knowledge or permission. I will take action to have my work removed if it is used without my consent, both for personal privacy and protection reasons. This goes for any account I see my work on that is not owned by myself or those I accept to re-upload my work. For years, I have dealt with ongoing harassment from the same circle of people and the communities surrounding them, including Blood Orang 3, Kenji Doc, Fishsticks, Faye, Milky, Dirt, Bondi, and others associated with them. Throughout all of this, I have felt constantly targeted, lied about, and pushed into a corner. Over time, misinformation about me spread across multiple spaces online. I watched rumors, false accusations, and personal attacks circulate repeatedly, while people continued trying to paint me as someone I am not. On top of that, I have also had my designs and creative work reposted or used without my consent, which only added to the feeling that my boundaries and identity were not being respected. The emotional impact of all of this has been severe. There were points where I felt isolated, overwhelmed, and like I had nowhere left to go except to disappear entirely. Instead of allowing things to de-escalate after seeing the effect this harassment had on me, certain individuals continued escalating the situation further. Even to the point that they continued spreading misinformation and lies while I was taking time offline to help myself heal. Some people went as far as accusing me of faking serious personal struggles, including suicide attempts and self-harm, while others attempted to falsely associate me with accounts that were not mine. Seeing people continue to push these narratives, even after knowing how badly this situation affected me mentally and emotionally, has been deeply upsetting and damaging. I am making this statement because I want my boundaries, my experiences, and the impact this behavior has had on me to be acknowledged. No one deserves to be treated as a target for years simply because others have decided they hate them. I understand that when I was younger, I heavily messed up. I did disgusting, abhorrent things that no child should have done. I have lied, I have deceived others, I have traced. I made accounts and OCs that were directly created to upset others and went out of my way to steal and trace from people just because I didn't like them and they upset me. I was 100% petty. I have understood for a while that I am petty and have attempted to get better, not only with my artwork but with myself and my own actions. I learned very late on that I was locking myself out of being able to be creative and loving my artwork by mindlessly tracing from others. When signing up for stuff like Art Fight, I finally realized that heavily referencing and basically tracing off of my references was not okay and was in fact a form of tracing. When I did Art Fight last year, that was my first month of completely not tracing my references and attempting to learn how to reference without tracing. Since then, I have gone about learning more about my artwork, my style, and what I want to do with my artwork. I have learned not to heavily lean on tracing off of my references to achieve what I want with my artwork. With this being said, I have officially said and shown everything that I wish to regarding this video. I know that not everybody will agree, not everybody will accept my apology, and not everybody will believe I have changed. I know that time heals everything isn't really a good saying, and I respect those that do not wish to interact with me further knowing the type of stuff I have done. I accept that this is part of the position I have put myself in by causing as much disruption and anguish as I did when I was younger. I am still very sorry for my actions. I believe what matters now is what I wish to do and achieve going forward. I refuse to continue this online back and forth and will abstain from responding to every single account that I see posting about me. It is tearing and achieves nothing at the end of the day. This cycle has gone on for 12 years too long, and I believe it is time that, if nobody else will, I finally grow a spine and learn how to be the bigger person to ignore it. I have taken time off of being online to reflect and continue working on myself. Periodically I will continue this as I feel being offline and sightseeing is healthier than helping others breed negativity online. I will make sure that my changes are visible and will continue to be knowingly positive rather than just be a facade I say inside of a YouTube video. To those that I have harmed, hurt, damaged, or bullied in any way, shape or form, I am sincerely sorry from the bottom of my heart. I do not expect forgiveness, and I am not asking for it. I am apologizing so that I can take accountability for my actions, move forward and grow in a way that shows I have changed as a person. With all of that being said, this is where I am leaving things. Thank you for listening, and if I do not see you again, good afternoon, good evening and good night.